Hello, community, and welcome back to another Keeping It Real with Dr. Anita podcast. I am your host, Dr. Anita Polite Wilson, C-Suite Trusted Advisor, Board Director, and Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging Consultant, helping members of the C-Suite and their teams reframe diversity conversations from difficult to different. We are back with our continuing real conversation from the C-Suite with Dr. Aaron Day, the producer of Good Day LA on Fox 11 KTTV. And we are talking about Juneteenth celebrations. In particular, today we're going to be talking a little bit about the feelings that we have, the feelings that Black people may have, the feelings that white people may have, specific to July 4th and Juneteenth. Dr. Day, welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much.
So when we left off, we were talking about the three Juneteenth celebrations that really stood out for you. Right now, though, I want to really get into part of the conversation that we had early on that talked about the feelings that you've been sharing with other folks and conversations that you've had, particularly with other African Americans about their feelings about Juneteenth and July 4th. And to get us started, I want to read something that I heard when I was watching a program last year on July 5th. While watching the evening news, Harry Smith, a white male television journalist who has earned a news and documentary Emmy Award for outstanding writing, put everything into perspective for me. And here are his closing thoughts of his monologue to end the July 5th broadcast last year. As the founders prepared to sign the Declaration of Independence, Ben Franklin famously said, "We must indeed all hang together, or most assuredly we shall hang separately." Yet while they were signing the document declaring all men created equal, 500,000 fellow Americans were property, enslaved people, not equal by any standard. Our history is both woeful and wonderful. Our story should be shared, owned. It endangers no one to understand the sins of our past. For as an old book we've read says, the truth shall set you free. Now, community, you all know that I tend to get teary-eyed and emotional, but I was not expecting that because I've read those words several times previously, and I had never been struck as profoundly as I was just now. So, Dr. Day, my question is, with your background, not only as a producer of news, but also as a Black man having earned a doctorate of education, what are your thoughts about this quote I just read?
I mean, the truth shall set you free. It may sound cliche, but it's so true. Um, so I really appreciate what you read. I think the more we become educated, the more people learn, the more people read, the more people are exposed to the history, the more they become free to make decisions on their own, the more they are free to feel like it's okay not to go to that Fourth of July barbecue or light fireworks or whatnot. So I think it was very profound.
Now, I find it interesting that those words came from a white male, and basically he's saying, you know, there are things in our collective history as America that, of course, we're not proud of. But if you're going to embrace American history, you have to embrace all of it.
Mhm.
And the ugly side that says folks that look like me were building America, not because we had a choice, but because that's what we were brought here to do. No one wants to talk about that history. And it's not to be inflammatory. It's not to continue division. It's to say, look, you have to embrace everything about this country. What are your thoughts about that? Why are we still having a problem with that?
Well, that's a very. I mean, we're kind of seeing that play out today
Mhm.
across the country with those critical race theory conversations. So, look, I think America's history and some of the things that have happened to different groups are pretty awful and terrible. And so I think America and the institutions want to keep that information not a secret, but they want to make sure that it's not dominating the conversation. I mean, look, the information's out there, but the systems and the way things are built um, tend to um, hide that info so that it's not at the forefront. And look, I think most people and most organizations probably want to remember the good stuff about themselves, right?
Mhm.
Including America. So it's called, it's called reputation
Mhm.
management is a term I like to use. We do it, people do it, America does it too.
Mhm. Or selective memory is
Yeah.
another term that I heard that I think might be appropriate. The conversation that I want to have with you is by no means meant to be inflammatory.
Mhm.
And in the moment, I'm thinking, when we have a wound and it heals, but it doesn't heal quite right,
Mhm.
sometimes you have to go in there and tear it up again and get all the gunk out so that it can heal properly.
Mhm.
And I think that conversations like this is part of getting the gunk out so that we can continue to heal properly. In our first conversation, you mentioned the fact that you've been having some conversations of late over the last couple of years or so. It sounds like we're kind of on the same mental trajectory here, just exploring this with some of your friends. What are the real conversations that you've been having?
Well, look as a person who produces the news and makes important editorial decisions. I'm very careful about who I engage with,
Mm-hmm.
um, and what opinions I share. So when I have conversations, for me, it's really about listening and you know offering different voices and or facilitating a conversation or just raising questions. So um, I think as we, I think as, I mean, let me go back. So the last few years, we've seen a lot of excessive force cases involving police and African
Mm-hmm.
Americans, right? George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, um, Philando Castillo. I mean, there's been a lot of incidents in the last few years. Those incidents have resulted in um, protests, nonviolent and violent.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think as those incidents happened in the last few years, people have began to question the Independence Day tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's part of it as well. People look at America and nothing being done about police reform, you know, the racism, the comments being made by certain politicians, and just kind of, social media has exposed a lot of racism and just awful people. I think that's part of the reason why we're seeing a decline in interest amongst African American people with celebrating the 4th of July. It's like, well, why would I celebrate Independence Day when America can't even, take care of my people or pass laws to keep us safe? So, those are the type of conversations and things I'm reading about.
And it's understandable. When I'm working with my clients, I encourage them, especially in the C-suite, that it's not enough to say, "All right, everybody, diversity, inclusion is and belonging is important. You all go make something happen. You have our blessing." I have to insist that they personally situate themselves in the space, in the conversation, and talk about diversity, inclusion, and belonging by taking off their leadership role and just showing up as Anita or as Aaron and having that honest conversation first amongst themselves. Well, what does diversity look like? For instance, we're saying that we value the voice of a Black woman, but does anybody have any kind of relationships outside of work with Black women that might afford you the opportunity to have that deeper conversation and really understand what her voice is? And so I feel like right now, the conversation that we're having is really setting the framework for folks to situate themselves in the discussion around the 4th of July and Juneteenth celebrations, not to pit one against another, but to really have a look at the two different perspectives, the two different celebrations,
Mhm.
and how they land on folks. The way the 4th of July lands on the majority is not the way the 4th of July lands on the marginalized. And I think that's an important discussion to have. And to your point about social media, politicians saying things that are inflammatory, it doesn't have to be ugly. It doesn't have to be difficult, but it's definitely different. It doesn't have to be hard, but it's most definitely complex. How do we go about doing that?
Look, I don't think anyone should be compelled to celebrate anything that they don't believe in. I mean, 4th of July is not a must do. So I mean, to everything you just said and what I just mentioned, look, I think America and people are becoming more educated. Information is so much easier to access than ever before. So I think we're just witnessing people becoming more independent thinkers. We're witnessing people become more frustrated with how things are ran, and just frustrated with how America has been addressing issues. And so, I mean, I think, you know, people take it personal when comments are said that are inflammatory. Folks take it personal when people are killed and beaten and nothing's being done about it. So, again, this doesn't surprise me that we're seeing more people moving towards the Juneteenth tradition more so than 4th of July. I mean, I promise you, we're going to see way more Black people gathering on Juneteenth than on the 4th of July in Lamar Park.
Mm-hmm. And while there's nothing wrong with that,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think it might take to get not just Black people excited about Juneteenth, but everybody?
That's a fair question. I mean, Juneteenth is not a new. It's not new, right? Although it became a federal holiday recently, I think that's a first step, right? I mean, I think that's a first step. That kind of elevates the holiday and gives it more exposure to folks who may not know what it's about. It's gonna take the community and parents, schools. All right, I think schools are going to have to probably start including this more into their curriculum, um, and look, and I'll do my part. As a gatekeeper of news and information. I think the media plays a part. So, if there's an event that I can cover or that I can mention, I'll do my best to do so. So I look, this is you chip away at something like this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely.
It's going to take a lot of events. It's going to take a lot of time to get other people on board with what this holiday means to America.
So, community, the next time we have our conversation, our real conversation from the C-suite with Dr. Erin Day, it will be our last, but I think it will probably be our most inspiring. So please join me and get in the flow with me. Follow, like, overshare any conversation that helps you reframe diversity conversation from difficult to different. Share it with your network. Until next time, this is Dr. Anita reminding you to stay blessed and keep it real.